She's been on her maiden voyage ever since the blood of Calvary bought her. She's weathered violent storms. Some passengers jumped overboard and drowned. But she's not just some Titanic. She's the church, and she's not going down. Sail on, old ship of Zion, brave what lurks in a cold dark night. Sail on, old ship of Zion, till you see that beacon light. Sail on, old ship of Zion. He's on board, you're not alone. Sail on till you hear the captain say land's inside, you've made it home. This ship was launched from a hill outside Jerusalem. Caught a brand new gust of wind when it breezed through the upper room. Rode out a storm with a jail sail song at midnight. What makes you think she's gonna sink in some modern day typhoon? Sail on, old ship of Zion. He's on board, you're not alone. Sail on till you hear the captain say land's inside, you've made it home. Sail on, old ship of Zion. Sail on, old ship of Zion. Sail on, old ship of Zion. He's on board, and I can't wait to hear him say, church, you've made it home.
And that was the old ship of Zion. Well, in the first part of the message, I said there would be two questions. The first part was, why should we bother making a difference? And I mentioned that first, we should be difference makers because our world depends on it. Second, we should be difference makers because our fulfillment in life depends on it. And third, we should be difference makers because God expects us. The second one, what kind of people does God use to be difference makers? Most of the people who made a difference in the Bible were not well known. They were not all that talented. Most of them did not appear qualified for the work that God had given them. In fact, some of the difference makers in the Bible even resisted at first. When Moses stood in the wilderness in front of the burning bush, he must have been glad to learn that God was about to rescue the oppressed Israelites from their Egyptian captives. But when God said in Exodus chapter 3 and verse 10, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt, Moses started making excuses. The man many people considered to be Israel's greatest leader tried to get out of being a difference maker. Some of the difference makers in the Bible were unqualified. The Apostle Paul, who probably brought more people to Christ than any other person on earth, was not an eloquent speaker. For I have resolved to know nothing while I was with you, except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I came to you in weakness and fear, and with much trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power. That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 2 to 4. Paul wasn't a great speaker, but God used him in a mighty way to make a difference. David was such a great difference maker that he is mentioned more often than any other person in the Bible. But he started life as a shepherd boy, so unqualified that the father forgot to mention him when Samuel came looking for someone to be the king of Israel. Rahab was used by God even though she had worked as a prostitute. Mary was a simple peasant girl who pleased God and became the mother of the Messiah. God doesn't always use people who are wise, influential, or of noble birth to do His work. Instead, God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are great. And you can read that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verses 27 and 28. He has often selected the unlikely people of this world to be His special difference makers. Some of the difference makers in the Bible got off to the wrong start. God told Jonah to go to Nineveh to preach against their wickedness, but he went in the opposite direction and ended up in the belly of a fish. So God gave him another chance, and he eventually made a difference. David had fought a number of battles and was finally king when he slid into bed with Bathsheba one night and got her pregnant. And in an attempt to cover up his immorality, David, who is described elsewhere as man after God's own heart, lied and murdered. But God gave David another chance, and he was a difference maker. Peter was chosen to be one of the apostles, but he later denied Jesus 3 times on the eve of the crucifixion, when he left the courtyard of the high priest weeping bitterly. Peter probably thought that he was finished as a disciple. But Jesus offered forgiveness and gave Peter a second chance. A few weeks later, the disciple preached the first gospel sermon on the day of Pentecost and became a leader in the early church. What can we learn from these biblical examples? Of course, God works through people who are highly educated, consistently faithful, well prepared, and in important positions. But more often, God uses ordinary people to be His difference makers. He uses people who initially resist, people who seem unqualified, and even people who have blown it previously. Folks, God uses people like us. In conclusion, I want to read you a little story. Larry was a truck driver, but his lifelong dream was to fly. When he graduated from high school, he joined the Air Force in hopes of becoming a pilot. Unfortunately, poor eyesight disqualified him. So when he finally left the service, he had to satisfy himself with watching others fly the fighter jets that crisscrossed the skies over his backyard. As he sat there in his lawn chair, he dreamed about the magic of flying. Then one day, Larry Walters got an idea. He went down to the local Army-Navy surplus store and bought a tank of helium and 45 weather balloons. These were not your brightly colorful party balloons. These were heavy-duty spheres measuring more than 4 feet across when fully inflated. Back in his yard, Larry used straps to attach the balloons to his lawn chair, the kind you might have in your own backyard. He anchored the chair to the bumper of his Jeep and inflated the balloons with helium. Then he packed some sandwiches and drinks and loaded a BB gun, figuring he could pop a few of those balloons when it was time to return to Earth. His preparations complete, Larry sat in his chair and cut the anchoring cord. His plan was that after he enjoyed some flying time, to lazily float back down to Earth. But things didn't quite work the way he thought. When Larry cut the cord, he didn't float lazily up. He shot up as if fired from a cannon. Nor did he go up a couple hundred feet. He climbed and climbed until he finally leveled off at 11,000 feet. At that height, he could hardly risk deflating any of the balloons, let the unbalance the load, and really experience flying. So he stayed up there, sailing around for 14 hours, totally at a loss as how to get down. Eventually, Larry drifted into the approach corridor for Los Angeles International Airport. A Pan Am pilot radioed the tower and told the air traffic controller that he had just passed a guy in a lawn chair at 11,000 feet who had a gun in his lap. They must have got a kick out of that one. Eventually, a Navy helicopter dropped a rescue line over Larry and gradually hauled him back to Earth. As soon as Larry hit the ground, he was arrested. But as he was being led away in handcuffs, a television reporter called out, "Mr. Walters, why'd you do it?" Larry stopped, eyed the man, then replied nonchalantly, "A man can't just sit around." Larry's statement has a message for us. We cannot sit around any longer. We need to go out and make a difference in the lives of others. We need to offer our hands to those